Hassan's in Slough. What happened to your wife, Hassan?
Well, 3 weeks ago in Slough, my wife was called a stupid Muslim, and that was partly my fault because I was parking a car at a car park in front of the driver who called out that name. Now, I wasn't aware of that until my wife told me afterwards, and of course my daughter had witnessed what had happened. Had I known what had transpired, I would have got out of the car and would have invited him and his wife to the local Starbucks and Costa in Slough High Street, because I think conversation, and you use the term dialogue when you mentioned this other story, that is the key thing here. I would not have reported them to the police as a hate crime, or I'm involved with Prevent as well. That would have been a Prevent referral, but I would not have done that. I think a conversation can go a long way. And with regard to my 6-year-old daughter, I had to explain what racism is. And that, not all people are like that. The majority of people are decent human beings. Mm-hmm. And I referred her to my favourite verse in the Quran, which I did quote at the Tory conference in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks, and subsequently was quoted by Theresa May in 2014 at the Tory conference when she was Home Secretary. And it says, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, so that you may, and made you into nations and tribes, so that you may know each other and not despise each other. So in other words, we have to rise above all of our cultural differences. So that's what I have to teach my daughter.
What did you make of our first caller who got aggravated because two people in a shop who were supposed to be serving her were speaking Arabic and ignoring her?
Yeah, that's, I understand her frustration. It is rude, I think, for people to speak in a different language in front of a third person who may not be privy to that particular language. So it's just a rudeness. So I do understand her frustration, and I would not speak my mother language is Bengali, and if there are people in front of me who don't understand the language, I'll speak to them in English. In terms of the reaction after a terrorist attack, I'm not surprised with this blowback, because a lot of the imams and the scholars who've been condemning terrorism were warning that this would actually happen. This blowback would happen after these terrorist attacks. So I understand why it's happening, but I think dialogue and conversation goes a long way.
Well, you sound very conciliatory and wise. Thank you, Hassan.
Hassan is on the line from Slough.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum, Maajid. I have to commend your two previous callers ago for actually admitting that he might have been wrong, and that is something quite significant, and it is a lesson for everyone. I think what your conversations up to now have shown with the supporters of the right-wing protests out there are the inherent contradictions that they have, similar to the jihadi contradictions, so whether it's contextualization, whataboutism, and so on. Yeah. Now, as the listeners will know, I'm fairly right-wing with my political views, but I've never been a fan of Donald Trump, ever. And again, I have to commend Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush for actually calling it...
Senator McCain.
It was actually a murder. Yeah, but one thing that does concern me is that the word terrorism hasn't actually been used much for these atrocities, whether it's the murder of Joe Cox or Charlottesville. This is white supremacy terrorism. Yeah. And as you may know, I'm involved with Prevent. I'm a great fan of Prevent. It is about mitigating the journey towards extremism, whether it is Muslim extremism or white supremacy terrorism. That's not to say left-wing extremism doesn't exist. It does exist. I do remember witnessing a rally in Trafalgar Square. It was an anti-Israeli rally. It's all well and good criticising Israeli policy, but when I saw one of the Israeli flags where the Star of David was replaced by a swastika, I was absolutely appalled. Equating Zionism with Nazism, I was really appalled with that. So left-wing extremism does exist, and David Duke is quite interesting. He was saying that the left were terrorists when in fact it was the right that killed.
You look at their language, Hassan. If you were to replace their vocabulary and make it jihadist vocabulary instead, the content and the structure of their sentences could just as well be coming from Islamist sympathisers for jihadist terrorism as they could be from far-right sympathisers of white supremacist terrorism. They use exactly the same kinds of excuses.
Yeah, they do, and that's in very contradictions we're exposing now. I suppose my final point is we have two unfinished conversations I'd very much like to continue at some time in the future. One was your valid challenge to me about my negative stereotype on secularism. And the other one was the link between Islam and terrorism, where you say it's not everything to do with Islam, nothing to do with Islam, but something to do with Islam. I'll still disagree with that, so I hope we can continue those topics very soon.
Absolutely, Hassan. And an absolute pleasure speaking to you as well, and thank you for calling in. That's Hassan there from Slough, and I do hope when it's relevant you do call back on those topics, and I'd love to speak to you.